The saloon was dimly lit, a haze of cigar smoke curling in the air as the low hum of conversation mixed with the occasional clink of whiskey glasses. It was the kind of bar where regulars nursed their drinks like old grudges, and newcomers were eyed with quiet suspicion. Tonight the place had a particular edge, fueled by the presence of a group of young men who sat near the counter, their laughter sharp and unkind. They were dressed in crisp leather jackets, their jeans barely dusted from the road. They carried themselves with the cocky swagger of men who had never known real struggle, their voices loud, their jokes cutting. At the far end of the bar, an old man sat alone, nursing a drink, his face lined with the stories of 1,000 sunsets. He was dressed simply, denim shirt, worn boots, a weathered Stetson resting beside him. He sat still, his long fingers wrapped around his glass as though listening to something only he could hear. The young men took notice of him, their amusement piqued by his silent presence. "Hey, Pops," one of them called out, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Lose your horse outside?" The others laughed, nudging each other, egging him on. The old man didn't respond. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. Undeterred, another one spoke up. "Maybe he's lost. You need us to call the nursing home for you, old-timer?" More laughter. The bartender, an older man himself, shot them a warning glance, but they ignored him. The old man remained unbothered, his silence infuriating in its steadiness. Then, as the laughter began to fade, he set his glass down. Deliberately. Slowly. The sound of it meeting the wooden counter was barely more than a whisper, but in the heavy hush that followed, it might as well have been a gunshot. The group fell silent, watching as he shifted slightly, turning his head toward them. And that's when they saw his face, sharp, weathered, chiseled by time, yet still carrying the undeniable steel of a man who had seen and done more than they could fathom. His eyes, cold, piercing, and unwavering, locked onto them with the weight of decades behind them. And then a slow smile, barely there, but carrying something unsettlingly familiar. Recognition dawned too late. Clint Eastwood. The air grew thick, the weight of the moment pressing down on the young men's bravado. They had been mocking a legend. One of them swallowed hard. Mr. Eastwood, we didn't—" But Clint held up a hand, silencing him. "You boys ever hear about respect?" His voice was low, gravelly, edged with years of no-nonsense authority. The young men fidgeted under his gaze, their earlier arrogance evaporating like mist under the sun. "I was your age once," Clint continued, leaning back slightly. "Thought I had the world figured out. Thought respect was something you earned with your fists or your mouth." He let his words hang in the air before adding, "But the thing about respect, it don't take much to lose it." The bartender smirked, watching the men shift uncomfortably. The rest of the bar was dead silent, every patron hanging on to his words. Clint took another sip of his whiskey, then placed the glass down again, more gently this time. "See, a real man don't need to prove himself by tearing someone else down. A real man knows when to sit back, listen, and maybe, just maybe, learn something." One of the young men, now noticeably paler than before, cleared his throat. "We didn't mean any disrespect, sir." Clint let out a small chuckle. "Didn't you?" Silence. Then slowly, he stood up. The movement alone carried an unspoken power, a presence that filled the room. He picked up his Stetson, placing it on his head with the kind of casual grace only he could manage. "Just remember, boys," he said, adjusting the brim, "you never know who you're talking to. And if you don't start learning respect, one day you're going to mouth off to the wrong man." With that, he tossed a few bills on the counter and turned to leave. The young men parted instinctively as he passed, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and humiliation. The door swung shut behind him, the echo lingering in the silence he left behind. It was the bartender who finally spoke, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "Well," he mused, wiping down the counter, "guess you boys just got yourselves a real-life lesson in respect." The young men sat quietly, their drinks untouched. And somewhere outside, beneath the vast indifferent sky, Clint Eastwood walked away, just another legend moving through the night.